The city was buzzing with life that Saturday afternoon. The sun shone warmly over the streets, making the buildings glint and the pavement shimmer slightly. People were out and about, enjoying the weekend in their own ways. Some were carrying shopping bags from small stores tucked between cafes, while others were seated outside sipping coffee and watching the world move around them. Children ran across the sidewalks, laughing and chasing each other, while the occasional cyclist weaved carefully through the crowd. The air smelled faintly of freshly baked bread and exhaust from the cars passing by. It was the kind of day that made the city feel alive, ordinary, and yet full of stories waiting to happen. On one of the busier streets, a young black girl walked steadily along the sidewalk. She was about 18, tall for her age, and carried herself with quiet confidence. She had on a light jacket and jeans, and a small backpack rested over her shoulders. Her headphones were on, and music filled her ears, making her pace feel rhythmic and calm. She wasn't in a hurry. She had just left a nearby cafe after grabbing a smoothie and a small pastry, enjoying the rare free day she had for herself. As she walked, she occasionally glanced at the shops around her, noticing a display of colorful flowers outside a florist and a little bookstore with stacks of old novels in the window. She smiled faintly at the small details of the city, feeling content in her own little world. But she didn't know that not far ahead, a situation was quietly brewing, something that would test her composure and eventually lead to an unexpected twist she could never have predicted. A loud roar broke her calm thoughts. A motorcycle sped along the street, weaving slightly between pedestrians and cars. The biker, a man in his late 20s, was wearing a black leather jacket with patches, heavy boots, and a helmet that barely concealed his face. His bike was loud, the engine growling as if announcing his presence to the entire street. He slowed just a little as he approached the sidewalk but didn't stop, not even for a moment. The girl noticed him at the last second. She stepped back instinctively, pulling her backpack slightly closer to her chest. She could feel her pulse quicken. There was something about the biker's presence, something aggressive, something intimidating, that made her uneasy. As she tried to focus on the music in her headphones, she heard a sudden sharp voice. "Hey, girl."
"Yeah, you."
"What are you looking at?" She froze. The biker had stopped a few feet away, leaning slightly to shout directly at her. His words were meant to provoke, to mock, and to make her feel small. She hadn't done anything, she was simply walking, but the man didn't care. His tone was loud, harsh, and meant to be confrontational. People around glanced over briefly, some looking uncomfortable, others looking away, unsure of whether to intervene. The girl's first instinct was to ignore him. She kept walking, hoping he would lose interest, hoping this would be just another street annoyance she could shake off. But the man wasn't done. He revved his motorcycle engine loudly, leaning in as he shouted another insult. This one was even more personal, cutting deeper, and clearly meant to provoke fear. Her stomach churned. She felt anger mixed with fear. She had faced people being rude before, but this was different. The intensity in his eyes, the way he leaned into the situation, made it clear he wasn't just joking. She quickened her pace, trying to put space between herself and him. From a nearby coffee shop, a man sat sipping on a latte, dressed casually in jeans and a simple hoodie. He was watching the city go by, people moving, cars passing, life continuing in its ordinary rhythm. He noticed the scene unfolding on the street. The girl walking, the biker shouting, the reactions of the people around them. At first, he observed quietly, curious but cautious. But as the insults grew louder and more aggressive, he realized this wasn't just a verbal spat. The girl looked scared, and the man felt a sense of responsibility stir inside him. He wasn't just a bystander now. He was witnessing someone being threatened, harassed, and made to feel unsafe. The crowd on the sidewalk was small but noticeable. A few people paused, watching the interaction unfold. Some reached for their phones, perhaps thinking of recording the incident, while others simply whispered to each other, uncertain about how to act. The girl's face was tense, her steps faster now, her eyes darting around for a safe path. The biker continued to shout, seemingly fueled by the attention he was receiving, misinterpreting the small crowd's glances as admiration rather than disapproval. The man from the coffee shop rose slowly. He didn't rush or move aggressively. Instead, he walked with purpose, calmly approaching the situation. He wanted to de-escalate, to protect the girl without making things worse. His presence was noticeable but not overbearing. People around him began to sense a change in the energy of the street. Meanwhile, the girl continued to walk briskly, but her headphones made it hard to hear the full extent of the insults. She could feel eyes on her, some supportive, some judgmental, and it made her feel exposed. Her mind raced. She wondered why someone would choose to be cruel in such a public space, targeting her for no reason. She felt frustrated, angry, and above all, anxious. The biker, noticing someone stepping toward him, stopped shouting for a brief moment. He glanced at the approaching man, sizing him up, trying to gauge whether this was another challenge, someone else to provoke. But there was something different about this man, something in the way he moved, the way he held himself, the calm confidence in his steps. The biker hesitated, and for the first time in this encounter, the energy of the situation shifted slightly. The girl noticed the man now standing near her, positioned between her and the biker without saying a word yet. She felt a wave of relief wash over her. Someone had stepped in, and it wasn't with anger or aggression. It was with calmness and authority, a presence that made the biker pause. The people around them watched silently, holding their breaths. Some were whispering, pointing discreetly, and others simply observed, sensing that something significant was unfolding on their street. The biker, realizing he was no longer the only focus, glanced around, noticing the subtle change in the crowd's demeanor. The girl slowed her pace, still wary, still tense. She looked at the man and gave a small nod of thanks, her eyes expressing what words could not. The man nodded back, a quiet acknowledgement, his focus still on the biker, ready to intervene if necessary. For a moment, the street seemed to hold its breath. The hum of the city faded slightly in the background, replaced by the tension between these three people, the girl, the biker, and the man who had chosen to step in. The ordinary city scene now felt charged, significant, as if life itself had paused to watch how this moment would resolve. And in that pause, the girl felt something she hadn't expected. A small sense of hope. Even in a world where strangers could be cruel for no reason, there were also strangers who could step in, quietly, calmly, and make a difference. The biker revved his engine again, but this time it sounded less threatening, more unsure. He looked at the man, tried to measure the situation, and realized that perhaps this wasn't a confrontation he wanted. The girl, sensing the shift, kept walking, her steps more confident, guided by the presence of the stranger who had decided to act. By now, the crowd's whispering grew slightly louder, and a few people began recording the scene, but the girl didn't notice. Her attention was on the immediate safety, on the reassurance that came from someone being there, silently protecting her. And so, the first part of the day's story ended with a moment of quiet tension, a city street returning to its rhythm, and a young girl discovering that even in the face of unprovoked cruelty, there could be calm, protective presence ready to turn a dangerous situation into one of hope. The biker's engine growled once more, louder this time, as if trying to reclaim control of the street. His leather jacket creaked as he shifted slightly on his seat, and the harsh glare in his eyes was unmistakable. The young girl kept walking briskly, her heartbeat quickening with every step. She tried to focus on the pavement in front of her, but the words the biker had shouted still echoed in her mind. They were sharp, demeaning, and unnecessary, and yet he continued, undeterred. The city's ordinary rhythm seemed to pause around them. People walking nearby slowed their pace, turning their heads to see what was happening. Some reached for their phones, whispering quietly to the person next to them. A few concerned onlookers whispered words of encouragement to the girl, telling her silently through their expressions that she was not alone. But others looked away, pretending not to notice, unsure of whether to step in themselves. The man from the coffee shop moved closer, carefully but deliberately. He didn't rush or yell. He didn't even need to introduce himself. His calm presence, steady and unwavering, created a subtle barrier between the girl and the biker. The biker noticed immediately. For a brief moment, there was a flicker of doubt in his eyes. He had expected fear and submission, not quiet confidence. The girl glanced at the man, her eyes wide with a mixture of relief and continued anxiety. She could feel the tension thickening around them. The biker, seeing her hesitation, tried to intensify his intimidation. He revved the engine again, the sound vibrating through the street, and shouted another insult. This time it was sharper, more cutting, as if he wanted to provoke a reaction. The girl's stomach knotted, and she instinctively pulled her backpack closer to her chest. Her hands trembled slightly, though she tried to hide it. Her mind raced, thinking of ways to escape, ways to avoid confrontation, ways to put distance between herself and this aggressive stranger. She wanted to run, but she also knew that any sudden movement might provoke him further. The man stepped closer, his voice calm but firm. "Hey," he said, addressing the biker directly. "That's enough. Leave her alone." The biker froze, taken aback by the unexpected authority in the man's tone. He hadn't anticipated anyone stepping in, not like this. His eyes darted briefly to the small crowd of people now forming around them, sensing a change in the energy of the street. Some were still recording, others simply watching, but all of them were now witnessing the confrontation. For a moment, silence hung in the air, broken only by the faint hum of distant traffic. The biker tried to respond, his voice raised again, but it sounded uncertain, forced. He wasn't used to being confronted with such calm confidence. Usually, fear or shock would stop people in their tracks, but not this man. The girl could see the biker's frustration beginning to surface. She took a tentative step forward, feeling the man's presence beside her as a shield. It gave her courage, however small, to face the situation without panic. She realized that the presence of someone willing to act made all the difference. For the first time since the encounter began, she felt the possibility of control returning to her side of the street. The biker, noticing the subtle shift, tried one more time to assert himself. He leaned slightly closer, revving the engine again, and shouted, "Who do you think you are?" His words were loud, meant to intimidate, but they lacked the force they had before. He could feel the pressure of the crowd and the quiet authority of the man standing with the girl. The man's eyes met the biker's, unwavering. "I'm someone who won't let you harass her," he said. His voice was calm but carried a weight that made the biker hesitate. It wasn't anger. It wasn't aggression. It was steady, controlled authority. The kind of presence that told the biker without threatening that this situation was no longer his to dominate. The girl felt a small wave of relief. She could see the biker faltering, unsure of what to do next. She realized that the quiet, firm intervention of a stranger was more powerful than shouting or escalating the situation. She drew in a deep breath, steadying herself, trying to match the calm determination of the man beside her. People around them began to react subtly. Some whispered words of support. Others nodded in agreement with the man's stance. Even the casual bystanders who had been recording their phones now seemed more aware, feeling the tension of the moment and the importance of someone standing up for another person. The energy of the street had shifted completely. The biker, frustrated, revved his engine one last time, but it sounded more like an attempt to scare himself than anyone else. He looked at the girl, then at the man, and hesitated. There was a moment of silent calculation. Was it worth continuing this confrontation, or was retreat the better option? The presence of the man had changed everything. The girl could feel her confidence slowly returning. She realized that she didn't have to face this alone, that someone else was willing to stand beside her and protect her space. She had faced difficult situations before, but this was different. This was public, visible, and yet she wasn't powerless. She felt a flicker of hope, a sense of safety she hadn't expected just minutes ago. The biker, sensing the mounting disapproval of the crowd and the quiet strength of the man standing beside her, finally slowed the revving of his engine. He muttered something under his breath, his voice no longer carrying the same force. The words didn't reach the girl, and she didn't care to hear them. What mattered was that the intensity of the threat had diminished. The man kept his position steady, not advancing, not threatening, just being a calm presence. His body language communicated that the biker had no room to escalate further. It was a simple human act of courage, standing up for someone else without aggression, but with clear authority. The girl continued walking, her steps more measured now, no longer driven purely by fear. She could feel the support around her, subtle but powerful, and it reminded her that even in a busy city, surrounded by strangers, people could still choose to protect one another. The biker, realizing the situation had turned against him, finally gave up the attempt at intimidation. He revved the engine one last time, more as a huff of frustration than aggression, and started to pull away from the sidewalk, slowly moving down the street. His presence was still loud, still noticeable, but it no longer carried the same threat. The girl paused for a moment, taking a deep breath. She turned slightly to glance at the man who had intervened. He nodded once, just a subtle motion, acknowledging her relief without making her feel indebted. The simple, quiet act of protection had changed the entire experience for her. People on the street began to return to their routines. Some whispered about what had happened, some continued recording, and others simply walked past, sensing that they had witnessed a small but significant moment. The girl felt a mix of relief and lingering adrenaline, realizing how quickly a situation could turn dangerous and how quickly it could be resolved with courage and calm intervention. For the girl, the afternoon was no longer just a routine walk. It had become a lesson in human kindness and bravery. She realized that strangers could have a profound impact on our lives, even without seeking recognition or reward. The street, the crowd, the city, it all felt different now. Ordinary life had intersected with something extraordinary. The man stayed with her for a few more steps, ensuring the biker had moved far enough away that she could feel safe again. He didn't need to speak much. His presence alone had been enough to de-escalate the situation and give her a sense of security. As they reached a quieter part of the street, the girl finally spoke, her voice low but sincere. "Thank you," she said. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of relief, gratitude, and respect. The man smiled faintly, not in a boastful way, but with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had done the right thing. He nodded and said, "Stay safe," before stepping back into the flow of the street, blending into the crowd once more. The girl continued on her way, her steps lighter, her mind still processing everything that had just happened. The biker's insults, the tension, the sudden intervention. It was all still vivid in her memory. Yet she also carried with her a newfound sense of resilience and the reminder that courage could come in many forms. And in that moment, she realized something important. Even in a world that sometimes seemed cruel and unpredictable, there were people willing to act, willing to stand up, and willing to protect others without seeking attention. That thought lingered with her as she walked the rest of the street, blending back into the rhythm of the city, forever changed by a simple, human act of bravery. The street had begun to settle back into its normal rhythm, but the tension of the previous moment still lingered in the air. The girl walked a few steps ahead, her heart gradually slowing its rapid pace. Her mind replayed the biker's words, harsh and unnecessary, and yet the memory of the man who had stepped in gave her a sense of protection she had not expected. The city around her felt alive again. The chatter of people, the distant sound of car horns, the occasional laughter of children. But she knew that what had just happened would remain vivid in her mind for a long time. The man stayed close, walking at a steady pace beside her. He didn't try to dominate the conversation or make her feel awkward. He simply matched her pace, offering a quiet presence that allowed her to regain a sense of calm. Every so often he glanced toward the biker, who had now pulled his motorcycle to the edge of the street and was watching, lingering in frustration. The biker's aggressive energy had not vanished entirely, but it was subdued, replaced by uncertainty and doubt. The girl's breathing began to steady as she focused on small details around her, the pattern of sunlight reflecting off the shop windows, the way a group of pigeons scattered as people passed, the smell of freshly baked bread from a nearby bakery. These small things, ordinary and often overlooked, helped her center herself after the frightening confrontation. She felt a mix of relief and lingering anxiety. Relief that the situation hadn't escalated, and anxiety because she realized how unpredictable people could be, how quickly danger could appear even in the middle of a busy city street. The biker, however, wasn't ready to leave just yet. He revved his engine lightly, the growl echoing against the buildings. It was not a confident roar anymore. It was a frustrated hiss, an attempt to reclaim some sense of dominance. He called out another insult, but it was quieter this time, lacking the conviction of before. He was testing the waters, unsure if the girl would respond, unsure if the man would intervene again. The man didn't hesitate. He stopped and turned slightly, planting himself firmly between the girl and the biker. His stance was calm, but there was an unmistakable firmness in his posture. It wasn't threatening, but it was clear. The biker would not pass without consequences. His eyes met the biker's, steady and unwavering, and in that look the biker could see that the previous energy of intimidation would not work this time. "Back off," the man said, his voice calm but carrying an authority that made the biker pause. "Leave her alone, now." The biker opened his mouth to respond but stopped midway. The crowd around them had grown slightly, People had noticed the intensity of the situation and were watching more closely. The atmosphere of the street had shifted again. The energy of the biker's aggression was meeting resistance, both from the man and the subtle, watchful attention of the onlookers. He could feel the pressure mounting, and the confidence he had carried just minutes ago was beginning to crumble. The girl felt a mix of emotions, relief that the man had intervened again, anxiety about what the biker might do next, and a small surge of courage knowing that she was not alone. She realized that standing silently with someone who cared enough to act could be more powerful than anything she could do on her own. Her eyes met the man's and she gave a small nod of acknowledgement. She didn't need to speak. The gesture was enough. The biker tried to appear defiant, shifting slightly on his bike and revving the engine again. But the growl sounded hollow this time. His attempt to intimidate had lost its edge. The man's steady presence and firm voice made it clear that the biker's aggression would not succeed here. The crowd of pedestrians, some recording on their phones, others simply watching, also contributed to the pressure. The biker could feel the eyes of dozens of people on him, noticing his behavior, silently judging his actions. For a few tense seconds, no one spoke. The only sounds were the faint hum of the city, the occasional distant car horn, and the soft shuffle of people shifting on their feet. The biker's gaze flicked between the girl and the man. He could see the girl standing a little taller, no longer frozen by fear, and he could see the man's steady eyes, the unyielding posture that told him very clearly, this street would not tolerate harassment. The man stepped slightly closer, though not in a threatening way. His intention was clear, to create space, to protect the girl, to ensure the biker understood that his behavior would not continue. He spoke again, calm, deliberate, measured. You don't get to treat people like that. Not here, not now. Step away, the biker's jaw tightened. He revved the engine once more, but it was more like a hiss of frustration than a roar. He had expected fear, but he found courage. He had expected silence, but he was met with unwavering resolve. He had expected compliance, but instead, he faced resistance that was both calm and undeniable. The weight of the moment began to press on him. The girl, sensing the biker's hesitation, felt a flicker of confidence herself. She realized that fear did not have to dictate her actions. With someone willing to act beside her, she could reclaim her own space. She continued walking slowly, deliberately, making her presence known without provocation. Every step was measured, every glance calm, every breath steady. She felt empowered by the knowledge that she was no longer alone in facing the situation. The crowd's energy grew subtle but noticeable. A few bystanders whispered encouraging words. Some raised their phones discreetly, not to mock, but to ensure that if anything happened, there was evidence of accountability. Others simply observed, aware that the dynamic of the street had changed. It was no longer a simple confrontation between one aggressive biker and a passerby. It had become a moment of human courage visible to all who cared to notice. The biker's confidence continued to waver. His aggressive stance faltered. His revving grew hesitant and his attempts at intimidation weakened. He could feel the pressure of the man's authority, the girl's quiet determination, and the subtle support of the surrounding crowd. All of it combined to make him question whether this confrontation was worth continuing. The man took another small step forward, ensuring that the girl's space was fully protected. His voice remained calm yet firm. You don't need to prove anything here, move on. It's over. For the first time, the biker hesitated completely. His hands tightened on the handlebars. His foot tapped nervously against the ground and he glanced around at the crowd. The energy of intimidation that had fueled him only moments ago had dissipated. He realized that continuing would only humiliate him further, and the balance of power had shifted decisively. The girl, now a few steps ahead, could feel the tension dissipating slightly. She was still cautious, still alert, but the immediate threat had lessened. She understood the subtle lesson of the moment. Courage, when exercised thoughtfully, could diffuse aggression without escalating it. She felt grateful for the man who had intervened, not just for her, but for the way he had handled the situation, calmly, firmly, and without unnecessary conflict. The biker finally exhaled a long, frustrated breath and began to slowly move his bike away from the sidewalk. His insults ceased, his aggression faltered, and he began to retreat. The man did not chase him or shout. He simply maintained his calm stance until the biker was out of immediate reach. The shift in energy was clear. The street had returned to a safer, more ordinary rhythm. The girl slowed her pace, taking a moment to process everything that had happened. She looked at the man beside her and gave a faint smile. It wasn't a smile of relief alone. It was a smile of understanding, respect, and gratitude. She didn't need to speak. The acknowledgement in her eyes was enough. The man nodded once, subtle and unassuming, reinforcing the silent bond that had been created in the midst of chaos. He had acted when it mattered, and the girl had experienced firsthand the difference that courage, calmness, and human presence could make in a moment of danger. As the biker disappeared down the street, the girl felt her heartbeat finally return to a steady rhythm. The city sounds became comforting again. The distant hum of traffic, the laughter of children, the soft murmur of conversations from nearby cafes. Life had resumed, but the memory of the confrontation lingered, leaving an impression that would stay with her for a long time. She realized that ordinary moments could quickly become extraordinary when people made choices that mattered. A simple act of intervention, a calm presence, a willingness to step in and protect another human being. These small actions could change the course of a day, the emotions of a person, and even the energy of an entire street. The girl continued walking, each step lighter than before. She felt a renewed sense of strength, a quiet confidence that came from knowing she wasn't entirely alone in the world. The city continued around her, bustling and alive, and she blended back into the rhythm of ordinary life, carrying with her the extraordinary memory of courage she had witnessed that afternoon. The biker's motorcycle slowly faded down the street, its engine's growl retreating into the distance. The tension in the air that had gripped the street for the past several minutes began to loosen, replaced by a quiet, cautious relief. The girl took a few deep breaths, still alert, still aware that danger could appear in a heartbeat. Her mind replayed the biker's insults and the way the man had stepped in for her, calm and steady, a presence that had changed everything in just a few seconds. She realized how quickly fear could turn into relief, and how ordinary strangers could become protectors without fanfare or expectation. The man who had intervened walked beside her for a few steps, his calm energy radiating reassurance. He didn't speak at first. Instead, he gave her space, allowing her to process the incident, to regain composure while still being there as a shield. She noticed the way he observed the street around them, scanning for any lingering threat, the same awareness she had seen in him before, calm, measured, intentional. There was no need for theatrics, no shouting or dramatics, just a steady human presence that made all the difference. She slowed her steps, finally daring to look around more openly. People who had been watching the scene unfold now whispered among themselves, some exchanging glances that suggested admiration or relief, while others simply returned to their routines, carrying the energy of the encounter with them silently. A few pedestrians gave the girl small, encouraging nods, gestures of acknowledgement that let her know she had not been alone in the moment of tension. The city was resuming its rhythm, but the memory of the confrontation lingered, vivid and intense. The biker, meanwhile, had pulled his bike further down the street, muttering under his breath. He slowed his pace and glanced back, sensing that the dynamic had changed irrevocably. The confrontation had ended, but the lesson of the street had left its mark on him. He could feel the eyes of the crowd, the quiet strength of the man standing with the girl, and the subtle presence of accountability surrounding him. For the first time, he realized that his aggression and insults had no power here. The girl, walking beside the man, felt a mixture of emotions, relief, gratitude, lingering fear, and a quiet sense of empowerment. She had been frightened, yes, but she had also witnessed something remarkable. Courage without aggression, authority without hostility, protection without expectation. These qualities had reshaped the entire encounter and allowed her to regain control of her own space. She glanced at the man and gave a small, thankful smile. It was a simple gesture, but it carried all the weight of her emotions: relief, recognition, and respect. He returned the gesture with a subtle nod, not seeking praise, not needing acknowledgement, simply offering the silent satisfaction that comes from doing the right thing. The girl's thoughts wandered briefly to how quickly life could shift. One moment, a normal walk down a city street. The next, a frightening encounter with a stranger's aggression. And yet, amidst that danger, there was the possibility of intervention, of human courage, and of protection from someone willing to step in. She realized that these moments, fleeting as they might be, had the power to shape her perception of safety, trust, and humanity. The man spoke softly, breaking the quiet. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice calm, deliberate, and reassuring. The girl nodded, taking another deep breath. "Yes, thank you," she said. Her voice was steady now, though it still carried the weight of adrenaline and lingering tension. I wasn't sure what would happen." "You're safe now," he replied, "and you handled it well." There was no overpraise, no dramatization, just recognition of the girl's resilience in the face of an unexpected challenge. They continued walking, slowly putting more distance between themselves and the biker. The street had returned to its normal pace, the sounds of everyday life blending back into the background. People continued their errands, children played nearby, and the hum of traffic resumed its usual cadence. Yet, for the girl, the experience had imprinted a memory that would stay with her, a reminder that ordinary places could contain extraordinary moments of human courage and connection. As they walked, she reflected on how often people passed by situations like this without acting. It was easy to look away, to pretend nothing was happening, to assume someone else would intervene. But in that moment, she had witnessed firsthand the impact of stepping in calmly and intentionally. It wasn't about heroics or aggression. It was about presence, awareness, and courage. The man hadn't yelled, hadn't threatened. He had simply stood firm and protected her space, letting his calm authority speak louder than any insult or intimidation could. The biker had long since moved out of sight, and yet his presence still lingered in her thoughts. She realized how quickly fear could arise from a single person's aggression, and how quickly it could be replaced by relief when someone chose to act. She felt a renewed sense of awareness, an understanding that danger was unpredictable, but that human kindness and courage could intervene in meaningful ways. The man beside her didn't push conversation, didn't pry. He simply maintained a presence that allowed the girl to feel safe. Every so often, he would glance toward the direction the biker had taken, scanning subtly to ensure no further threat was nearby. His calm vigilance reminded her that safety sometimes came from simple, quiet actions, and that these actions could have a lasting impact on someone's sense of security. The girl's mind drifted to the lesson of the afternoon. She thought about how ordinary strangers could influence the course of events, how a single act of courage could turn a frightening moment into one of protection and hope. She realized that the man's intervention had not only shielded her, but had also subtly reminded the crowd around them of the importance of standing up for others. Even those who did not speak or act directly had witnessed an example of bravery that didn't need recognition. It existed simply to make a difference. As they reached a quieter section of the street, away from the main crowd, the girl finally allowed herself to exhale fully. The adrenaline that had coursed through her body began to fade, replaced by a lingering sense of relief and gratitude. She looked at the man beside her again, this time with a deeper appreciation, recognizing not only his courage but also the subtlety of his approach. He had acted decisively without escalating the situation, had protected her without imposing, and had restored a sense of safety in the midst of chaos. "Do you want me to walk you a bit further?" he asked, still calm, still attentive. The girl nodded, grateful for the continued presence. "Yes, I think that would help." Together they walked down the street, keeping a steady pace and remaining aware of their surroundings. The city's sounds had returned fully. The chatter of pedestrians, the hum of traffic, the occasional bark of a dog. But the memory of the confrontation remained vivid. It was a lesson that she would carry with her, the unexpected ways in which courage could appear, and the importance of recognizing and appreciating it when it did. The girl felt a quiet sense of empowerment. She understood now that fear did not have to define her actions, that support could appear unexpectedly, and that ordinary moments could become extraordinary through human intervention. She realized that courage was not loud or aggressive. It could be calm, deliberate, and unwavering, as she had just witnessed. As they reached a small park at the end of the street, the man finally stopped. "You're in a safe place now," he said softly. The girl smiled, a genuine, relieved smile that carried the weight of the afternoon's events. "Thank you for everything," she said. Her voice was steady, filled with gratitude and a newfound appreciation for the presence of kindness in unexpected places. He nodded once more, offering a small smile before stepping back. "Take care," he said. Be safe." The girl watched as he blended back into the flow of the city, disappearing into the crowd without fanfare, leaving her with a sense of security and a reminder of the quiet power of human courage. She stood there for a moment, reflecting on the incident, the lessons learned, and the ordinary heroism she had just witnessed. The city around her continued, alive and bustling as if nothing had happened. But she knew better. She carried with her a memory of protection, calm and bravery that had turned a frightening encounter into a moment of human connection and safety. The street had returned to normal, but the impact of courage lingered, reminding her that ordinary people could make extraordinary differences simply by choosing to act. The afternoon sun continued to warm the city, casting long shadows across the pavement. The girl took one last deep breath, feeling a sense of closure. She had faced fear, witnessed courage, and emerged not only safe but empowered. The lesson was clear. In a world that could be unpredictable and sometimes cruel, there were always those willing to step in, to protect, and to remind others that humanity and kindness could prevail in even the most ordinary of places. The city's usual rhythm had returned, the distant sounds of traffic, chatter, and laughter filling the streets. The girl stood for a moment in the quiet corner of the park where she had been escorted, taking a deep breath as if to let go of the tension that had gripped her just moments ago. Her heartbeat was finally steady, and the adrenaline that had surged through her veins was slowly ebbing. She felt a mix of relief, gratitude, and an unexpected sense of empowerment. What had begun as a frightening, unprovoked encounter had transformed into a moment that would remain vivid in her memory for a long time. She glanced around at the city, now ordinary again, yet for her it felt subtly changed. She noticed the small details she had overlooked before, the way the sunlight filtered through the leaves of the trees, the pattern of shadows on the pavement, the smell of fresh bread from a nearby bakery, and the soft murmur of conversations from nearby cafes. All of it seemed more vivid, more alive, because she had experienced firsthand the fragility and resilience of human interactions. The man who had intervened was no longer by her side. He had stepped back, blending seamlessly into the flow of pedestrians, leaving no fanfare, no expectation of thanks. She realized that was part of the beauty of what he had done. He had acted out of instinct, out of awareness and empathy, not for recognition or reward. His calm, firm presence had shifted the balance of the encounter without aggression or confrontation, allowing her to regain a sense of safety and control. As she walked slowly through the park, she reflected on the lessons of the afternoon. She thought about how quickly situations could turn dangerous, how unpredictably aggression could appear in everyday life, and how easily fear could take hold if someone chose to remain silent. Yet she also thought about how courage, calmness, and human presence could transform the same situation, creating safety and empowerment where there had been fear. The encounter had shown her the extraordinary impact ordinary people could have on each other's lives. Her thoughts turned briefly to the biker. She wondered if he had realized the magnitude of what had just happened. The moment had been a quiet reckoning, a subtle but profound lesson. The biker had attempted to assert dominance, to intimidate, and to make someone feel unsafe, but he had met calm courage instead. He had felt the presence of someone who refused to let fear control the situation, someone who protected not out of anger, but out of humanity. Perhaps the encounter had left an impression on him too, one that would make him reconsider future actions, the way he treated others, and the power of intimidation versus compassion. The girl's own emotions shifted as she walked further into the park. She realized that her fear had been real and justified, but so had her ability to face it. The simple act of having someone stand beside her had restored her sense of agency, reminding her that support could appear in the most unexpected ways. She felt a quiet strength, a sense that even in a world filled with unpredictability and occasional cruelty, there were always people willing to act with integrity, courage, and empathy. A few moments later, she found a bench near a fountain and sat down, allowing herself to fully process the events. "Children,"